Hi everyone, I'm Elisha. I'm on the Hardwired staff and I'm here to introduce our guest speaker, Robyn Williams. She has a background in TV production and news reporting and also public relations. And most recently, she's been working with nonprofits to help increase their impact on communities. And for her background in TV production, she has been a production level, or she's been a producer in production capacities at some of the most popular programs of the day, including the Lisa Show, the Queen Latifah Show, and a show with Sybil Shepherd. She also worked as a field producer for reality shows such as Extreme Makeover, Home Edition, and she also worked as a broadcast news reporter for ABC, CBS, and Fox News television affiliates on the Texas-Mexico border, which she'll get into. Mrs. Williams earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Communication Studies at Biola University, and she lives in California with her husband and her son, and she would move to Africa if her husband would agree to relocate. So, Robyn, we're so grateful that you're here to be able to teach us and learn, and that we can learn from you, and I'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Alicia. As Alicia mentioned, I've had a colorful career that started in the entertainment industry. And then I pursued my dream of becoming a reporter. Wait. Let me start over again. I just want to share that I have had a colorful career that started in a golf cart. Yes, a golf cart. I was a golfer or a glorified production assistant at Paramount Studios, where I drove around and delivered mail, got coffee, and did any kind of errand that was asked of me. The beauty of this is I started at a show at the time called The Lisa Show. It was a talk show. It was a popular talk show of that time. And I started in a golf cart, and then I worked my way up. I was a wardrobe assistant. I was an audience coordinator, researcher, until I finally made my way and became a field producer. So while at The Lisa Show, I got to produce shows. And one of the things that I got to cover was the school shooting that made headlines, the first ever school shooting that made headlines here in the US. And it happened in Columbine. And I was there just a few hours after the school shootings occurred. And I got to tell stories of the students who saved the day and who helped save their teachers. I got to tell stories about women and giving them a makeover so they could see themselves in a new light. And I got to tell stories about, helping people and making their dreams come true. So I worked at The Lisa Show for about 4 years. And as Alicia mentioned, I also got to work for Extreme Makeover, Home Edition, and other reality shows. My career then took me all the way from Hollywood to New York City, where I worked at the Queen Latifah Show. And the beauty about working for Queen Latifah, who I love, by the way, because she's very tell it like it is that I learned to be able to tell stories that would help people make their dreams come true. And so I was the producer that did a whole series on making people's dreams come true. And what stands out to me is telling the story of a young lady who had always wanted to be a gospel singer. It was her lifelong dream, but she got pregnant at age 15, and then she had other kids, and it just never happened. And so we got her up there on stage with Kirk Franklin and Queen Latifah, and she got to be a gospel singer for the first time in her life. And so working at the Queen Latifah Show, the Lisa Show, all the reality shows I worked on was very exciting. But my lifelong dream was to hold a microphone and tell stories myself. And so that took me from working in Hollywood and New York City all the way to the bottom of the US on the Mexico border. That is where I became a news reporter in Market 92. And I got to tell stories about people risking their lives to come here to the US. I got to tell stories of violent crime, of government leaders who were paid to assist drug loads across the border, and stories that make headlines every day now, I covered on a daily basis. And while it was exciting to tell these stories, some of them heart-wrenching, because many times I was the first one at the scene or the one on the front lines, The story or the person that stands out most to me, being in South Texas, one of the poorest areas in the US, is a woman who is whiter than I am and has white hair and is our elder at 87 years old. Her name is Bertha White. And Bertha White lived in South Texas. She was so-called retired. Her and her husband, by the way, had lived all over Africa and opened orphanages. And her husband had passed away, so this was supposed to be her retirement. But she lived in one of the poorest areas, and a tornado blew through Penitas, where all of these immigrants who were not US citizens, their houses were blown apart and they had no place to lay their head. And so as a reporter, I went out, of course, to cover what was going on and to share stories. And that's where I met Bertha White. I was avidly trying to find somebody who was helping these people, and I had no idea that it would be a gray-haired, 87-year-old woman who was taking these people in. The exciting part about this is one of the families that she helped had a young son who was 10 years old. He was in a wheelchair and he was fed by a tube. And she took this family under her wing as if it were her own. And as I began to tell and share that story on the news, I got barraged with phone calls from construction workers, electricians, plumbers, people who were owners and wanted to do something. And the beauty is, the next thing I knew, I was covering stories, unveiling this new home for this family that was in need. And that's why I learned the power of story can truly change people's lives. So I ask you as journalists, why does story matter? And you may be looking at me going, Robyn, we tell stories every day. We know that stories matter. But I want to take us back to ground zero, to 101, to looking through the lens of what it means to tell a compelling story. But I want to start with reminding you why story matters. And story matters because story is what speak to us. We're more hungry to resonate with a good story than we're even aware of. And so one of the key things about a story is creating something that will resonate with your audience. Some of the most amazing storytellers are evil dictators. When we look at some of the evil dictators of our time, many in Africa, the reason that they have risen to power and that they have this amazing ability to mobilize people is they truly have the gift of telling a compelling story. So how can you be a compelling storyteller? That's one of the key ingredients, right, that we as journalists need to have. And I think it's important to look at the basics of what resonates and what makes a compelling story. So to be a compelling storyteller, one of the key ingredients is clarity. And you may be saying to yourself, yeah, I know all of this. Well, I want to take you to a place to understand why clarity is so important. And I ask you, when you think about and listen to music, when you hear music, what does it inspire you to do? Or what does it bring and conjure up in you? When I hear music, I want to dance and I want to sing, and it's got this melody that just takes me back to places and memories. And there's a huge difference when I hear a song that I love and I start singing at the top of my lungs and dancing than when I hear noise. So sometimes my son will turn on the TV and all of a sudden it's just this static and this noise, and I'm just going like this, like turn it off. And I say this to you because some of the stories that we've written, when I look back, some of the stories that I've written have been just awful noise. They haven't made any sense. They're not clear. They're long-winded and go on and have all these detours. They just don't make any sense. And then I look back and it's like I almost want to put it in a frame because I've written a story and the music is so powerful. It has a crescendo and it has an ending that's majestic, and it just speaks not only to me, but the people I'm sharing it with. And I know that you as journalists want your stories to be like music. You want it to be a story that people are moved by, that they remember, that they get compelled by, and you want to steer away from it just being noise. So the first thing that's most important is just clarity, making sure that your story is clear, that it's musical, that it's something that people get inspired by and want to move to. And this is often done by painting a picture of potential tragedy. So one thing that I've really taken a close look at is what really connects with the human brain. And the human brain needs structure, it needs clarity, it needs to follow something that makes sense. And that way they don't have to think about it very much, they just get moved by it. So when we look at story and how you can build a story structure that speaks, that resonates, that mobilizes, you really want to have key elements. And so I'm just taking you back to remind you of those key elements, because they really are the secret formula of creating, generating, and speaking a story that will make a huge impact. So when we talk about a story structure, a simple framework that works, and it works in Hollywood, it works on the news, it works when I tell my 4-year-old son a story every night, it works in just about any setting. Has some key ingredients. In a good story, a compelling story, has a character. And we outline who the characters are. And one of the most important characters in a story is the hero. So when we get our pen out, or we're getting ready to tell a story, we really want to make sure it's clear who the characters are, and most importantly, the hero. And the hero is always faced with a problem, always. If there's not a problem to overcome, it doesn't speak to me. I don't get on my fake horse and want to run after them and save the day. You've got to have you've got to have the characters outlined. You've got to have that hero facing a problem. And for it to be compelling, the hero often needs to meet a guide that will steer them in the right direction. And the beauty about this is a guide can even be the storyteller himself. So a character has a problem, meets a guide who gives them a plan and calls them to action. And the beauty about a good story is that it either ends in success, they're either crossing that finish line, or they've avoided failure. And so when we look at these key elements about what makes a compelling story, I can only think of one of the best storytellers that I know that has told numerous stories that people talk about every day, and has probably been the biggest box office hit in this century, and that is George Lucas. When he created Star Wars, I don't think he had any idea how he was creating the secret formula of telling a story that would compel people and would really speak to them. So I want to share a clip with you from Return of the Jedi. And I want you to follow it closely and look at and identify who the hero is, who the guide is, what the problem is, and what they overcome. Take a look.
I can do it. You can't go on alone. Yoda will always be with you. Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. Anakin was a good man. When I first knew him, your father was already a great pilot, but I was amazed how strongly the Force was with him. I took it upon myself to train him as a Jedi. I thought that I could instruct him just as well as you. I was wrong.
There is still good in him.
He's more machine rather than man, twisted and evil.
I can't do it.
You cannot escape your destiny. You must face Darth Vader again.
I can't kill my own brother.
Then the Emperor has already won. You were our only hope.
Yoda spoke of another.
The other he spoke of was your twin sister.
But I have no sister.
To protect you both from the Emperor, you were hidden from your father when you were born. The Emperor knew, as I did, where if had any offspring, they would be a threat to me. That is the reason your sister remains safe anonymous.
Leia. Leia is my sister.
Your insight serves you well. Bury your feelings deep down, Luke. They do you credit, but they couldn't be made to serve the Emperor.
So who is the hero in Return of the Jedi? Well, the hero is clearly Luke Skywalker. And who's the guide? The guide is Obi-Wan Kenobi. And what's the plan? The plan is to defeat the evil empire and evil itself. And so what does the hero want? He wants to defeat the empire. But what is opposing him? Well, what's opposing him is pretty strong in the story because it's his own father who is the symbol of evil. And he's being asked to destroy his own blood so that good can overcome evil. And the beauty about this story is that Luke Skywalker shows up to, face his father and face the emperor, but refuses to destroy his father. And his father then comes around to the good side. Luke is faced with having to lose Princess Leia, who he just found out was his sister. He's faced with losing his friend Han Solo. And he chooses to hold on to the good. And at the end, he is able to destroy the evil empire. And so this has all the key elements when we talk about a compelling story, has all the key components. It's got the hero, the guide, the plan, how he overcame it. So when I think about, this is like a Hollywood box office hit. And it's really the formula that all of us can follow as you write stories every day, is to think about how George Lucas, in his brilliant mind, created this compelling story with the most basic formula. And so when I think about Sudan, and I think about Sudan in the headlines, there is one story that stands out. And it's not even that it stands out because it's from Sudan. It stands out because it was a story that made international headlines and reached just about every corner of the planet. And the story is about Miriam Ibrahim. Now, some of you may be thinking, Robyn, we have heard her story a lot. We've heard it a few hundred times, or maybe you're not as familiar with it. But I think it's pretty ironic that I, who lives in Orange County, California, knows all about Miriam Ibrahim's story and cares, and was actually one of the people who tried to use my voice to get her released. And so I am going to share her story as a reminder, and then we're going to circle back and talk about all the elements and why it's so compelling that it became headlines here in the US. Take a look. Hold on one second. Hold on one second, just like we all have technical difficulties. I am experiencing one, so here we go.
This case has touched a road nerve in Sudan. According to Amnesty International, Dr. Maria...
Robyn, we don't see it, so could you, you need to share the screen again so we can see it.
Sure. All right, here we go. We're in business.
This case has touched a road nerve in Sudan. According to Amnesty International, Dr. Maria Ibrahim, who is 8 months pregnant, was raised as a Christian. But the authorities consider her to be a Muslim. That's because that was the faith of her father. As a result, the court has given her 3 days to recant her Christianity and revert to Islam or be hanged. She was also convicted of adultery on the grounds that her marriage to a Christian man from South Sudan was void under Sudan's version of Islamic law, which says Muslim women cannot marry non-Muslims. Her lawyers are determined to appeal this verdict.
There are legal restrictions that prevent the punishment because she's pregnant. According to the law, no punishment is allowed until she gives birth and breastfeed for 2 years. Our strategy will be to challenge the verdict at the appeal court, the Supreme Court, and the Constitutional Court. We had several similar cases, but they were slightly different. The only similar case was that of martyr Mahmoud Muhammad Taha, who did not convert from Islam. His trial was basically a political one. Apart from that, there were those who claimed they were God or something, but no punishment was ever put in place.
Protesters gathered outside the court in Khartoum, both her supporters and those who back the punishment. Mary has a right to be a Christian, says the poster on the left here. And I have the right to choose any religion, says the one to the right.
The problem is that the ruling was a swift one, a death sentence taken so quickly.
This is a new and dangerous phenomenon. In my opinion, this is a kind of missionary. This is the first of a series to prompt apostasy.
There is a long-running debate in Islam whether apostasy is a crime. While death sentences are rarely carried out in Sudan, this case has attracted international concern and calls for the immediate release of Dr. Mariam Yahya Ibrahim. Alex Jacana, BBC News.
So who are the characters in this story? Well, the characters are clear. The characters are Miriam Ibrahim, her kids, her unborn baby, her husband, the attorneys. Who's the hero in this story? Well, it's clearly Miriam Ibrahim, because what spoke to all of us, and I'll drive it home in saying what spoke to me as someone who lives thousands of miles from Sudan, is that she was accused of apostasy and told that she was going to be hung in 3 days, 8 months pregnant, shackled. And when we look at the problem is clear. The problem is that she's being accused of this, and she married a Christian, she was raised a Christian, and was being told to recant and convert. The beauty of this story is that her guide in all of this is the attorneys. And what I love is that the attorneys are Muslim, and they are the ones that are guiding and navigating the road to help her overcome. And the reason that her story came here to the US and made international news is because she was clearly the hero who had this guide, and the problem was something that we all felt passionate about. And it didn't matter what religion we were just outraged that a woman who's 8 months pregnant and shackled was having to give birth in the basement of a prison and was faced with the reality of being hung for her belief. And the reason that Sudan became a country that maybe some of us weren't that familiar with and all of a sudden became intimately familiar is that we cared. And I, as just this mom who lives in Orange County, who had never really connected that much with your country before, all of a sudden I cared. All of a sudden, I was somebody who wanted to take a stand for Miriam. And I wrote all over social media and mobilized my community to try and get her released. So I want you to think about that story and why it has compelled so many people, and it has really crossed over country lines, racial lines, every line, and has resonated with people and compelled them to take a stand and to stand for truth. So I want to take us back as journalists to remember why we became journalists in the first place and the power that we have to tell story. And one of the key things that I want you to keep in mind is that you have the power, whether it's through a pen or a microphone, to sway people a certain way, to tell a story that will compel them to make a difference, to mobilize whole communities or countries of people in a certain direction. So I'm going to now show you a story, and I would like for you to think about it. I tried to pick a story that wasn't clear. It's not clearly outlined who the hero is, who the guide is, what the plan is, and how the story is going to compel people to do something. So I leave you to take a look at this story and then answer some questions about who the hero is. But the last thing I want to leave you with before we look at the story is I want to remind you of the power you have as journalists and storytellers to stand for truth, to mobilize people towards truth, and even when it's tough, to listen to that inner voice in your gut to make a difference, and that your voice matters, and how you tell a story can truly make a difference for those in your country and your community. Take a look.
Major General Qasem Soleimani was a senior commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the head of its elite Quds force. He graduated to the role 20 years ago and was regarded as the mastermind of Iran's military strategy in the region. He rarely spoke in public, but gave this interview in October, saying Iran's IRCG had expanded Islamic resistance to 500,000 square kilometers, connecting Iran through Iraq and Syria to Lebanon. The Quds Force runs Iran's foreign military and clandestine operations. The US attributed it to campaigns in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Germany, Kenya, Bahrain, and Turkey. Soleimani delegated Iranian diplomats to meet with US officials after the September 11 attacks, and they briefly worked together against the Taliban, but the relationship soon deteriorated. During the Iraq War, the US said Iran, through the Quds Force and Shia militias, killed more than 600 American service members, 17% of all US deaths in the war. The US and Iran's priorities aligned once more in the fight against ISIL, but didn't evolve past the battlefield. In April last year, the US designated the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization.
With this designation, we are sending a clear signal, a clear message to Iran's leaders, including Qasem Soleimani and his band of thugs, that the United States is bringing all pressure to bear to stop the regime's outlaw behavior. We ask that our allies and partners around the world do the same.
But Soleimani had the full support of Iran's government, and he received Iran's highest military award last year. As tensions heightened between the US and Iran, Soleimani continued to support Shia militias, including the Hezbollah brigades, who were targeted in 5 US airstrikes last week after they fired rockets at a US base. He survived many attacks on his life inside Iran and abroad, but it would be in Iraq, where Shia militias trained by his Quds force killed hundreds of Americans, that the US ended his reign, age 62. Charlotte Ellis, Al Jazeera. Major General Qasem Soleimani.
So I leave you with some questions to ask yourself. And that is, who is the hero in the story? What is the problem? And what is the result? And the last thing I want to say to you is that you have a lightsaber as a journalist. You have a lightsaber, and you can hold that lightsaber, and it can be bright green, and you can be telling stories for good, and that will make a difference. Or you can choose a red lightsaber and just go with whatever direction people are telling you to go. And so I just want to remind you of the power that you have as journalists, the difference that you can make, and how that is really going back to why you became a journalist in the first place. And so just want you to take away the reasons why you became a journalist, what it means to tell a compelling story, the difference between music and noise and how you want to create music. And I want to remind you of that green lightsaber that you want to hold every time you put your pen to the paper or the microphone below your chin to tell a story. And I'll circle back with you shortly, and we'll talk about these questions, and I look forward to doing so.